The question today is whether Keir Starmer can really make housing more affordable. So Labour's had a bit of a flurry of housing announcements and re-announcements lately, building on the Green Belt, ending leasehold and allowing local authorities to buy land at a price that doesn't reflect the value that planning permissions on that land could give it. First of all, what do you make of the fact that they're majoring on housing at the moment, Freddie? Do they see it as a sort of wedge issue between their party and the sort of NIMBYs on the Tory benches that the government can never quite cross?
They weren't doing that 6 months ago. It wasn't a big part of their... it wasn't one of their 5 key missions for government. I mean, they've sort of slotted it underneath the economic growth one. But if you look at the briefing,
Clause B of
it's a tiny little
one.
section. And then what we've seen in the past month or 2 months or so is a huge number of announcements. And whether those announcements actually result in a serious reforming agenda for housing, I think, is less clear. If you actually go down to some of the details of the policies, they're not as radical as they seem, and they're actually not too far away from where the government are on certain things. So that's something to look at. But I think we are going to see a ramping up of their rhetoric on this. We've got Lisa Nandy delivering a big speech just before conference, which we revealed in Morning Call a couple of weeks ago. Yeah. And I think Keir Starmer has been quite, I think bombastic is probably too strong a word, but he has been quite hard line on housing, and he has tried to strike a few divides with the government. I think it was interesting, we saw a report from Onward this week talking about millennials, missing millennials, and how the Conservative Party is really struggling to attract young people. And once you drill down into the polling of what were the top issues that millennials, which they define as between 25 and 40, I think, what they really care about, housing is up there. It's not for the general population, but it is for the millennials. So I think Labour are seeing an opportunity here. But more broadly, and going back to the missions, they see it as a way of driving economic growth. Or maybe they see a housing policy as needing to be justified by driving economic growth. So that's where they are at the moment. And we are seeing a ratcheting up of rhetoric, but I think the policies themselves do need a little bit more scrutiny.
Yeah, and even Labour, it's difficult to find consensus for these kind of policies. I remember when the Green Belt announcement came out, I was on a politics programme and there was a Labour MP on, Sarah Champion. She hadn't heard about these plans and she thought that it wasn't Labour policy. And when she was asked about it, she was pretty... She doesn't really want to commit to it because obviously any politician in their seat are going to have areas where people will oppose, building on that land. John McDonnell as well came out to say that he wanted the Green Belt protected in London.
Sadiq Khan as well.
Yeah.
I mean, it is remarkable when you actually look at what the Green Belt is and how the debate has changed around it. Councils can already change the Green Belt. I mean, they're discouraged to do so, but they can change where the Green Belt goes if they want to put housing on that area. So there's many things that mean that Labour aren't just suddenly going to build loads and loads of houses on the Greenbelt. We've already seen, for instance, the government have also said that they are going to look at allowing councils in exceptional circumstances to build on the Greenbelt. So how radical it is and whether all these things come together to see them meet this huge housing target that they need to meet to fill the backlog that we've developed in the past decade or so, it's unclear. It's very unclear.
Yeah, and I suppose it would mean forcing people like Sadiq Khan and others in local authorities and mayoralties to not oppose planning on the Green Belt in areas where councils want to build.
Yeah, exactly. So much of it is about planning, which we've not really seen Labour talk much about recently. Yeah. And getting over that local opposition, convincing people, convincing councils, convincing councillors, that's really important as well. We've not seen much debate about that.
Yeah. And what about this legislation to allow councils to buy land for a lot cheaper than they already can, Will? Is that the kind of thing that could make a big difference? Is it a radical policy?
Going back to the beginning of the sort of current phase of climbing house prices, at what many people see as an inflection point was the right to buy policy, which took a lot of council housing out of social housing and into private hands. That's the sort of side of it that's always told. But the other side of it was the Treasury borrowing limits that were imposed on councils and the way in which councils from that point onwards kind of stopped building social housing. It is widely accepted that is the remedy for the lack of social housing is for councils to be able to build it. Council finances are not in a good way. Because they haven't been allowed to build social housing, which is really, good source of income for a council as well.
Yeah.
It's, they've been building things like shopping centres, and commercial real estate is in real trouble. I should say, to be fair to Sunak and Hunt, they are certainly doing their bit to make pre-existing housing cheaper by failing to combat inflation. So, after the inflation data came out last week, obviously, those interest rate expectations go up, mortgage prices go up, and so you've got fewer first-time buyers can get into the market, and large numbers of people are facing significantly repriced mortgages when they refinance, which about 1.5 million people are doing this year. So just out this morning was the news that the housing market has had its biggest annual fall since 2009 so far this year. So yeah, they're certainly making houses a bit cheaper, but not more affordable. So they're becoming cheaper and less affordable. Which, personally, I think when you look at the number of mortgages that will be refinanced over the coming year and up till, the next general election, what might happen to rents with landlords getting out of the market as a result of that, what will happen to all the people who own houses that might, they might have seen as investments, which will also be going down in price. It does seem like a really politically astute thing to be concentrating on.
It does, especially because so many Conservative voters already own their home. They don't necessarily have a mortgage, so those problems and those higher prices don't really affect them.
And then also, as people come to remortgage, they may be reminded of one of the reasons why the interest rates have gone up so much. Often people associate that with Liz Truss's premiership, and that's something that will be an ongoing problem, I think, for the Conservatives. As long as Labour keeps saying Tory mortgage crisis, I think it will be politically beneficial to them. And just lastly on the leasehold issue, so this was, one of Michael Gove's aims was to try and abolish leasehold. He didn't quite manage to persuade Number 10 or the Treasury that that's the way to go. And Will, you've written a very good piece about why actually it would be, pretty difficult to do, at least in terms of existing leaseholders. I mean, maybe, trying to change the system in the future might be something that is a little easier. That's something that Labour's saying, and then they're saying, and a workable way to change current leaseholders into common hold. But they haven't really laid out their plans for exactly how that would work. But that's also an interesting sort of point of difference, I think, now between the opposition and the government. I've been reporting on a lot on the cladding crisis, but also on leasehold in general. The cladding crisis is probably the sort of however you say it, is sort of the ultimate symbol of the injustice of the leasehold system. And every time I reported on this, people would say, yeah, it's awful, but it's not. It's just Labour voters, it's just in cities, it's just in areas where there's new build houses. And actually that's not true. So a lot of the people that I've been interviewing for a piece that I'm about to publish are in red wall seats. So you have this system happening in houses that have been bought up in old mining towns, old miners' houses bought up by, big faceless companies, and people's service charges suddenly rocketing. You have new build housing estates, which are now being called fleasehold, because while they are freehold, the council isn't the one doing the maintenance of the communal gardens and areas. You actually have to pay an extra charge on those places that you have no control over. So I do think that it is probably a more electorally significant issue than perhaps some in the Conservative Party realise.
I think it will be, and it's, just going back to our previous conversation about inflation, as this anger builds up about the economy, it'll express itself in probably quite indirect and general ways. People don't necessarily think about all of the different parts to inflation and where they should necessarily blame, whether it should be the Bank of England or the government or companies. But if there is a general malaise with the economy, we do know that usually, and house prices fit into that as well, we do know that usually that goes very badly for the government.
Yeah, and leaseholds, I think that it is sort of contested how many leaseholds there actually are across the UK, but it is millions of households, isn't it? And it does have a strong whiff of, people have called, I think Michael Gove called it a feudal system. It does have a strong whiff of aspirational working people who, want to buy their own home being fleeced by landowners. It does have quite a smell of the 18th century or earlier.
All right, well, thanks so much for joining us, Will. It was great to have you. Thanks so much for watching. We'd love to know what you think. Please make sure you leave your comments below. And if you enjoyed watching this podcast, you can watch more of our videos on our YouTube channel. And don't forget to like and subscribe.